Right before we jump into this video, would you like me to send you this free guide to capturing motion in low light situations? Well, if you said yes, just look for this orange box over on the website, put your name, email address in it, hit send it, and I will send you that guide for free. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com, and this is a comparison between the Canon EOS R5 and the EOS R6. Now in this video, I want to help you decide which one might be the right one for you, because each one of these serves a different purpose, and depending on what you're shooting, it will determine which one of these cameras is the one that you will end up with. Now the interesting thing that you will see throughout this video is that the specs are very similar across the board, which may make it a little more difficult for you to decide which one to go with. Now I have used both of these cameras extensively in the real world. I've done real world reviews of them, given sample images for each of them, raw files that you can download. Those are linked down below. Now, if you're looking to see a comparison between the Canons, the Nikons, and the Sonys, you are not going to see that in this video, but we do have other videos where we put all of them across the table to help you decide on which system to go with and how they compare to the similarly priced body in the other systems. And now let's move on to the first spec, which is the image sensor that you will find in these cameras. On the R5 side, you have a 45 megapixel full frame CMOS sensor that is powered by a Digic X processor, which is the same as the 1DX Mark III. And on the R6 side, you have a 20.1 megapixel full frame CMOS sensor that is powered by that same Digic X processor, which is the same that you find in the 1DX Mark III. Now, what's interesting here, and that Canon has never confirmed, is that the image sensor, the 20.1 megapixel sensor in this R6 might be, and I have it right here, the same sensor that's in the 1DX Mark III. That would be absolutely insane that they put the same sensor in a $2,500 camera that they did in a $6,some-hundred camera. So look, 45 megapixels, you're a wedding shooter, you're a portrait shooter, you're someone who does landscapes. That is where the more megapixels comes in handy. If you're a sports photographer, you want what this camera offers. The lower megapixels means you can shoot a lot of frames per second. We're gonna get to that in a minute, because now that I said that, usually the lower res sensor can shoot more than the higher res, except for the fact that these both do exactly the same, and I'm gonna get to that in a minute. Now, I said this is for sports, but that doesn't mean you can't use it for landscapes. You can't use it for weddings. You can use it for anything, because personally, I've used the R5 for sports. I've used the R5 for nature. So the differences are with more megapixels. If you're someone who does want to crop in, you have more megapixels to work with. I personally don't crop. That is a personal preference. I try to get it as right in camera as possible in terms of the composition, but a lot of people do want to be able to crop. Or when they're doing nature photography, they can't reach out and grab the goat at a distance. I don't know why I picked a goat to grab, but whatever. We're grabbing a goat at a distance, and they need to crop in to do it. So that's where more megapixels comes in handy. So who gets the check mark for this one? Well, I'm gonna say that the R5 gets the check mark for having more megapixels, and the R6 gets a check mark for having less. Yes! Moving on to ISO, the R5 natively will go from 100 to 51,200, expandable up to 102,400. The R6 on the other side goes from 100 to 102,400 natively, expandable all the way up to the never will I ever go to 204,800. So with 45 megapixels, you're squeezing more pixels onto the sensor, which means it's usually not as clean at higher ISOs, but it's still 45 megapixels. Now, the R6, being that it has less pixels, they generally are larger, which means when they're larger, you gather more light, which means it's cleaner when you're at a higher ISO, thus why you have an extra stop on this side, and it works better in lower light situations. You can push this further and still have clean shots. But the insane thing is that I've pushed the R5 to, I think I would be fine at 5,000 or 6,400 ISO, depending on the situation that I'm in, and I will still get clean shots. So both of these offer you amazing ISO capabilities at this time, so none of them get a check mark because they both do a good job. Now remember when I said both of these cameras shoot the same amount of frames per second, which is generally not the case because usually the lower res sensor can shoot more than the higher res, but in this case they both shoot at 12 frames per second with the mechanical shutter and 20 frames per second with the electronic shutter shooting silent, which is pure insanity that you can do that. But I do want to talk about if you are going to shoot silent, you're going to shoot at 20 frames per second, you may end up with some slight banding in certain areas because of the readout of the sensor. Because what happens is when the sensor is reading, when you take a picture, it's going like this. And so you may end up with lines, like in this picture of this hawk flying. I was shooting at 20 frames per second with lock-on focus on the eye, by the way, and it looks fantastic. But you can zoom in and you can see some of that move. You can see some of that banding. Now, that's not always going to show up. It will show up in certain situations. And if you're shooting a ball, like it's a ball sport, and you take a picture, sometimes the ball will warp. Okay, but that's not that big of a deal. Most people won't notice it, but that's the difference between a sensor that's doing a readout like this, and in the future, we hope to have something that's called a global shutter, which every time you take a picture takes an instant readout of the entire frame, which means banding will be a thing of the past, but we're not there just yet. So you have a faster readout here on the R6 than you have on the R5. But if you're in a silent area, or if you need to shoot silent, you're at a press conference, or you just can't make any noise, and you end up shooting that way, it's better that you get images than don't get images because you can't shoot. But with that being said, the R5 is basically silent even when you're using the shutter. The camera is pretty damn quiet. That shutter is almost silent. It's almost like they have a pillow inside of this thing where the shutter hits and it's like, oh, I'm so soft and I'm so quiet and it's like you could sleep with me, but it's so quiet. Steven was taking some pictures with it yesterday. He's behind the camera here. And I'm like, why is that shutter so quiet? I forgot how almost silent it is. So it is a very quiet shutter that would be great if you're shooting weddings and you need to be quiet. You can use the shutter or you could shoot silent, but just know you may end up with some banding in certain situations. Let me jump in here real quick to show you FroPack 2 in action with multiple presets on one image. Let's start with AC/DC, and that's what you get, followed by Charmin, boom, Cinnamon Toast Crunch, double stuffed Oreos, Golden Grams, and then we come down here to matte black. But check this out. There's like 3 different versions of matte black that you can play with, whether it's high contrast or low contrast. We created 15 all-new custom Lightroom presets that will help you speed up your raw workflow or give you a great starting point. Head on over to FroKnowsPhoto.com/FroPack2 because over there you can play with the sliders to see the befores and the afters. And if you decide to pick them up right now, they're currently on sale. Or if you pick up FroPack 1 and FroPack 2 as the FroPack bundle, you can save even more. Now, let's get back to the video. Let me break out the 1DX Mark III again because I want to talk about this for a second. This can do 20 frames per second silent or 20 frames per second with the shutter, mechanical shutter coming down. It locks the mirror up and it can just shoot. The shutter can come down and do it, which means you're not gonna get any banding. But the problem is you have to use the back of this screen. Now I did reviews on this. You can go check out those videos to see how I shot it as a mirrorless camera, but this is a DSLR with a ton of mirrorless features. So the fact that this can drop the shutter 20 frames per second means you're not going to get banding. The interesting thing here for the future is when Canon creates a 1DX style mirrorless camera, that is going to be insane. And I also don't want to forget to mention again that the sensor in this camera is basically the same sensor that you find in this camera, and the processor in this bad boy is the same processor that you find in both of these cameras. So Canon went to town and really put a lot of amazing features in both of these cameras. Now would be a good time for me to tell you that a lot of people were writing off Canon 2-ish years ago when they just came out with an EOS R, and that was their offering in the mirrorless world. I went out on a limb and I said that Canon is the sleeper of the bunch, meaning don't write them off. They have the ability to come out with something amazing. And when they took those 2 years and developed the R5 and the R6, I was amazed with what they came out with because they got much closer to the Sony world with the autofocus than I ever expected them to do in the next 5 years. They got there much quicker than I expected. Now, on a personal front, I don't shoot stills with the R5 or the R6 for my everyday shooter. My everyday shooter is right now a Sony A7 R4 and the A9 II and all the E-mount glass, but I could see at some point possibly using the Canons for my everyday shooters. But with that being said, you should be able to pick up any camera from any manufacturer. I don't care if it's Pentax, Olympus, Ricoh, whoever makes a camera. If you know what you're doing, you should be able to pick it up and get fantastic results. Now let's talk about the mounts on these cameras. You have an RF mount. Now for those of you who don't know what that is, the old mount on the DSLRs was an EF mount. So if you're new to this world, can you use EF lenses on this? Well, you can't just attach an EF lens to the front of the RF mount unless you have an EF to RF adapter, which Canon sells. The basic one is $99, and you can adapt your EF lenses and use them here, and they work really well. It's basically seamless, but the RF lenses are fantastic. Canon has an amazing lineup of the Hebrew Trinity and beyond, and even some affordable long lenses like an 800 f11, which I did a real-world review of, as well as a 600 f11 that we did a real-world review of as well at the zoo. And I don't think I shot sports with that one just yet, but I was amazed with what I could get at the zoo. Now, they have things like a 28-70 f2, which we're actually filming on right now on an EOS R5. We have it set to 70 millimeters at f2. That is a monster freaking lens. So you have very nice lens choices, but right now at the time of recording this, most of the lenses that you can get for the RF cameras, they're going to be on the little bit more expensive side because you do not have third-party support. You can't purchase a Sigma RF lens at this time. You can't purchase a Tamron RF lens right now. I do suspect in the future you will be able to, so keep that in mind when you're deciding on these systems and getting into the RF Canon world, that the lenses, you don't have inexpensive starter lenses to choose from right now. You don't have a lot of them. But the glass that they've created, the size of the 70-200, the 28-70 f2 is fantastic, the 24-70 2.8, the 15-35 2.8. They're going to have plenty of new glass coming up in the future that are fantastic. So you know who gets a check mark for this? Canon gets a check mark for this because the RF mount is fantastic. Moving on to something that's really important, the autofocus systems that you find in these cameras, starting with the R5. It has 1,053 phase detect autofocusing points that go edge to edge for 100% coverage. That's top to bottom, left to right, A to B, and start. You know me, Konami code. I say it every time. Steven's like, oh, you say it every time. I'm like, yes, so what? Maybe it's the first time somebody hears me say up, up, down, down, left, right, BA, start. Anyway, that's a lot of points that you really won't ever independently go and select yourself because the camera does most of the work for you now and decides which points are going to be the best. But edge to edge is incredible. You have dual pixel AF2, IAF, lock-on tracking, animal AF, touch and drag AF, focus guide for manual AF, which is actually pretty cool if you switch into manual and you ever need to shoot something manually. As you turn the focus ring, you'll see these two triangles come together, and when they're green, it means you're in focus. Keep in mind that you have lock-on tracking for video. You have IAF for video, which is what we're using right now. And that's only in the R5. You should see what the R6 does. Exactly the same thing. The fact that the more expensive camera and the less expensive camera share the same exact autofocusing system is incredible. The dual pixel AF is awesome. That's one of the reasons we decided to start shooting all of the videos here at the factory with the Canon EOS R5. That and how good the glass is, it's just a very good choice for us to use here in the studio. So nobody's getting a check mark at all for this because you get the same. You know who gets the check mark actually? The R6. They're getting a check mark because they have as good of an autofocus system as the R5. And in my real world experience, they work exactly the same because they are exactly the same. Hey, hi, are you subscribed yet? I hope you enjoy my videos, but hit that subscribe button as well as that bell so that you can get notifications when all of my videos go live. Now, let's get back to the video. Memory cards. In the EOS R5, you have two different memory card slots. You have a CF Express and a UHS-2 SD card slot. I personally prefer having two of the exact same, but with that being said, the CF Express cards are super duper freaking fast. They write fast, they read fast, they are fantastic. Now, Sony is starting to put what's called CF Express Type A into their cameras. That is a smaller card that's smaller than SD cards, but still super fast. I do suspect that a lot of the camera manufacturers are going to move to that form factor because it's smaller, though it's not as fast as a CF Express Type B slot that you find in this camera. It's still going to be really fast. Now on the R6 front, you have two UHS-2 SD card slots. That's great. They work well. You have two SD cards. I'd rather have the same, but at least you have two card slots because redundancy is important to me. I shoot redundant RAW files to both. You have the option to shoot RAW to one and JPEG to the others, but that seems kind of dumb to me. You have the option to have it be overflow, which means you fill up one card and it moves to the other. Well, that seems to be an option that maybe made sense like 10 years ago, but that doesn't make sense anymore. I shoot RAW to card 1, I shoot RAW to card 2, so if anything ever happens, I have both cards with RAW files on them. That's just for peace of mind. That's how I set it. Now, how many shots in a row can you get with the R5? You can get 180 RAW files to the CF Express card alone. If that's the only card in the camera and you're shooting to it, 180 RAW files in a row. Now, if you want to shoot with the redundant, the way that I do, the camera actually dumbs down to the slower card. The SD card is slower, so you're only going to get 87 RAW files. I say only, it's a 45 freaking megapixel camera. That's a lot of freaking megapixels and a lot of data that it's moving fast. If you need more than 87 shots in a row before you outrun a buffer, then you have a problem. You need to check yourself into some sort of rehab and some anonymous thing for I shoot too many photos in a row and I filled a buffer. I need to actually practice more to make sure that I capture the decisive moment. So, I mean, if they had two of the same card slots, you would get the 180 frames in a row, but shit, 87 shots in a row at 45 megapixels is a ton. And on the other front, being that you have two of the same cards, you get 240 RAW files in a row because they're only 20.1 megapixels. You also have the option to shoot compressed RAW, which will give you a RAW file, but it is 12-bit instead of 14-bit, and it just means you can squeeze more onto that card. Personally, I want to shoot at the highest bit rate possible. I want the best RAW file possible every time because you can always dumb it down, you can't dumb it up. Now let's move into the video features that you will find in these cameras, how they shoot, which one I would go with, what situation I would use them in. But before I do that, I do want to say that, in this day and age, if you just shoot stills, that's great, but if you're looking to make some money and you want to add the option for making more money from shooting videos, well, maybe you can start to learn that. Now, personally, I don't shoot a lot of videos. Now, here at the factory for FroKnowsPhoto, we do that. On the personal front, a lot of times I'm out in the world, I'm shooting stills. I would prefer a camera that maybe stripped out a lot of those features, but gave me more photo features. That may be something that Canon releases in the future, but let's talk about the R5's specs for video. Full frame 8K DCI 12-bit RAW video recording up to 30 frames per second, or 4K up to 120 frames per second at 10-bit 422 in H.265. Yes, it does 8K RAW in the camera. Now, that was a big controversial thing when it came out. That was something that Canon hammered home. Their marketing was like, this shoots 8K video, but we have all these awesome photo features we won't talk about, and we'll just get in trouble when our camera overheats and we need a fire extinguisher to blow it out because it overheats. But remember, you're shooting 8 freaking K. Nothing did that really before that wasn't $50,000. So 8K in the camera, it does work. And then they came out with a quick firmware update that did expand the time that you could shoot with 8K RAW or shooting 8K. They expanded that time with a firmware update, and there should be a new firmware coming that will expand it even more. What I will tell you is, if you're going to shoot 8K video and you're going to shoot long form 8K video, I mean, just think about all of the data that you're pushing. And I'm not just trying to defend Canon here. It was their fault the way they marketed it. But look, you don't need to shoot 40 minutes of 8K video in a row, but you can get 40 minutes with the firmware update. And I also mentioned that it shoots 120 frames per second 4K. If you're shooting 120 frames per second in 4K, you want to get that awesome slow motion, but you're not going to sit there and shoot for 20 minutes at a time. That's just really not the way that you're going to shoot in that mode. Now, right now, we're shooting in 4K HQ, which is 8K downsampled to the 4K, and it looks incredible. We're over 30 minutes into our recording time right now, and we are not overheating. We are not super worried about it because a lot of our videos don't get shot for an hour or 45 minutes or more at a time. These types of videos are the longest types of videos that we make beside the user guides, and with the firmware updates, it's worked really well for us. You can shoot in C-Log, and if you want to shoot externally, you have a dinky, rinky-dinky micro HDMI port. That is kind of dumb. This is really built to be a video shooting camera as well as a stills camera. You kind of want to have a HDMI port or a mini HDMI. It's going to be much better and less dinky. I've bent so many of those mini ones that it's not even funny. But the video quality from this camera is fantastic, and you're seeing it right now because we are shooting with the R5 and a 28-70 f2 on the main camera, and on this camera down here, we're shooting with an R5 with a 70-200. And now let's move over to the R6. Full frame 4K DCI video recording up to 60 frames per second at 10-bit 422 in H.265. Your 4K is oversampled from 5.1K, so it's not the same oversampled from 8K, but it is still oversampled, which should give you super nice and sharp video with no pixel binning. Now, you can only do 1080p at 120 frames per second. It doesn't do it in 4K, but of course, the R5 does give you that. You've got C-Log as well as a micro HDMI port, which I already told you that I hate the micro HDMI port. Now, the check mark for video is definitely going to the R5. The overheating issue, you're losing a check mark because Canon should have never marketed it that way, Canon. They shouldn't have over-marketed it. And I also think it gets blown out of proportion quite a bit because a lot of the testing is like, we're gonna put it in a heater. I mean, technically we took it out in the backyard in 70 or 80 degree weather, and it did originally overheat, but the firmware updates are coming. The first firmware update did make it better. If you're somebody who needs to shoot for an hour or 2 hours in a row and you're shooting 4K HQ, you're gonna end up overheating. You just have to keep that in mind. How do you shoot? Does it fit your style? So which one is right for you? Like if you're shooting weddings, can you get away with shooting this for a wedding? I think you can, because you're not shooting an hour in a row. I know some people do that, but you don't always need to be shooting for an hour in a row. The R6 still gives you very nice video as well. So those are the two options that you have, and they're fantastic options at that. Let me cut in here real quick and let you know that this video is brought to you by Squarespace. I personally use Squarespace for my own online portfolio because it's easy to use, it's drag and drop, and I don't need to know coding. To get a 14-day free trial, head over to squarespace.com/FroKnowsPhoto, and if you decide that it's for you, use the code FroKnowsPhoto at checkout to get 10% off your first order. Moving on to image stabilization in both of these cameras, we've got 5-axis in-body stabilization at up to 8 stops of IBIS with certain lenses, 7 stops with most lenses, and they pair really well with the new RF lenses that have IS. And even if they don't, you get great stability. Oh, and by the way, you have the same stabilization in both cameras, so both do a fantastic job, especially for Canon's first go of image stabilization in their still bodies. Next, we're moving on to the electronic viewfinder, which we call an EVF. The old school ones were an OVF, optical viewfinder. We have a long form video explaining the differences between both of those that is linked down below. So in the R5, you have a 5.76 million dot EVF. The R6 has a 3.69 million dot EVF. Have I noticed a lot of difference between both of them? The answer is no. I like having more of them. I mean, it looks great. Both viewfinders are fantastic. I don't need to give a check mark here. They both are very, very good electronic viewfinders. Now, I know some photographers have only used DSLRs and optical viewfinders, and they worry that they'll get a headache from flickering or something. Look, these aren't your grandmother's mirrorless cameras from 10 years ago where there was lines and all this stuff which could have given you a headache. I don't get a headache looking through these. The EVF is fantastic to have. The fact that you can see everything right in front of you, your exposure, your focusing points, all of the information that you need, the fact that you can play your video back through there or play your photos through there, or in fact for video, the fact that you can just put your eye up to that for better stability is fantastic. So if you haven't used a modern electronic viewfinder and you still think that they suck, you might want to go try them because they don't suck anymore. Moving on to the screens on the back of these cameras, there are some differences. You have a 3.2 inch, 2.1 million dot vari-angle touchscreen where you can touch everything. What do I mean by touch everything? I mean, you can touch it, not you can't touch it. That's my MC Hammer dance. I don't have those pants on today. But the vari-angle is really good. If you need to put it off to the side because you're shooting video, or flip it up, hold it above your head, or hold it down low. So you have a vari-angle 3.2 inch touchscreen that looks fantastic. Now on the R6, you have a 3 inch, 1.62 million dot vari-angle touchscreen. The same thing, you can touch everything. That's right. That's right. Oh, we don't have the tracking on right now because I wasn't supposed to move. If I was supposed to move, we could turn the tracking off, back on, and it would follow me perfectly. So which has the better screen? Well, the 3.2 inch is better than the 3 inch. It's better on the R5, so I'm going to give the R5 a check mark right here because it's slightly better. But look, they are very similar. They're much better than the screens that you find on the Sonys. Sony has some of the worst screens that aren't even a million dots. Nikon on the other front, Nikon has some very nice screens because you know why? Sony probably makes them. Moving on to wireless connectivity. The R5 has both 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi, as well as Bluetooth 5.0. Now the R6 has 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi and it is Bluetooth 4.2. Now, having the 5 gigahertz is going to come in handy when you need to push 45 megapixel files wirelessly tethered to your computer. That is a nice option to have. I don't do a lot of wireless transferring, but there are people out there that do the wireless transferring, so having more power, especially for those bigger files, is definitely necessary. Now, if you need more power than that, or you'd like to plug into Ethernet to transfer things, Canon has you covered. They have a grip right here. This is called the WFT R10A or R10A. Now this will work as a vertical grip. It has 2 batteries, so you can pop this out. You can put 2 batteries in here. It also will boost your Wi-Fi capability so you get more juice out of it, and you have an Ethernet port here on the side. Now this only works with the R5 and will set you back just shy of $1,000, like $999. But if you need this option, that's great. They also have you covered if you just want a regular grip. Now this one is the BGR10. It doesn't have the A on it. You still get to have 2 batteries in there, of which I actually have 0 right now. You can store the door from the camera right in here, which is always great because back in the day they didn't do that, but now you know where your door is when you go ahead and do that. And the great thing about this, other than it's priced at $350 and is a must-have if you shoot portraits, if you shoot sports, honestly, it's a must-have because if you want to go vertical and do it comfortably, this is how you do it. The other good thing about this grip is that it's reverse compatible between the R6 and the R5, which means it goes both ways.
Like you.
It's funny, Steven, very funny. Since we're talking about batteries, they both take the same LPE6NH battery, and there is also USB charging, and you can charge the camera via USB, both of them, and shoot at the same time. Now, the ratings on how many shots you can get are like in the 300s, but those are SEPA ratings. We've gotten 700 shots, 800 shots when it comes to stills. It also depends on how much you're reviewing your images, or do you have Wi-Fi on? Are you wirelessly transferring them? Are you shooting video? Because video is going to chew through the batteries much quicker. You may get a little over an hour or maybe an hour and a half out of a battery, but it all depends on the situation that you're in and how you're shooting, but the batteries do work pretty well. They're not your old school mirrorless camera batteries that just drained after about 100 shots. Since you're watching this video, it's possible that you don't own any of the cameras or lenses that I'm talking about. Well, if you'd like to show support for this channel and purchase one of those cameras or lenses or more, the links are down below. When you use those affiliate links, it helps us to continue to make these videos. Now, let's talk about the weights of the cameras. You got 1.62 pounds or 738 grams on the R5 and 1.5 pounds or 680 grams on the R6. They are basically similar. They both feel great in your hands. I like the feel of the R5 a little better than the R6. You have an extra LCD screen on the top of the R5, which really is not necessary anymore, that the R6 doesn't have, but they are very comparable in feel. The buttons are in great areas. Everything feels really good. Speaking of feeling really good, this should make you feel good. The wind tunnel test. You know, I kind of cheated for the wind tunnel test there because the iPad is kind of on a upward slope, which meant that the wind could go up and over these cameras. So you know what? Check mark goes to the iPad Pro. And finally, the price point. You've got $3,899 or $3,900 for the R5, and the R6 comes in at $2,499. I wish the R6 came in maybe at $2,200 or $2,300. It's worth every bit of that $2,500, but I remember when Sony came out with their A7 III, and that was $1,999 almost 3 years ago. That was a tremendous price. I don't expect that the A7 IV that they come out with will be $2,000. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, but keep in mind, this is the new price when Canon comes out with cameras. Generally speaking, they do $300 rebates from time to time, so that makes this a tremendous value at $2,499 or $300 less. $38.99 is a lot of money for a camera, but you get so much out of this camera. The stills and the video in the R5 are fantastic. If you're a working pro, you're shooting weddings, you're shooting portraits, you're making money with the camera, this is a fantastic option. That's not to say you can't do portraits with this. If you're a wedding shooter, maybe you have both of these cameras because you make money. This one you use for your portraits and the family shots and maybe shooting some video clips. This one is for when you need to get images in low light situations. If you're a sports shooter, this thing is tremendous all day, but so is the R5. It is such a toss-up, and Canon did a great job making these feature-packed cameras. They put a lot into both of them, and when it's similar, when it's the same autofocus, it's the same processor, it's the same shooting speeds, it just comes down to, do you want more megapixels, which is over here? Do you want less megapixels, which is over here? And can you afford the higher-priced camera? Personally, I'd have both. I'd have an R5 for when I need that, and I'd have an R6 for when I need that. I like having more megapixels. I don't need the high ISO capability like I used to, because honestly, 4,000 in this camera is going to be tremendous. I probably could push it up to 6,400 or maybe even 8,000 depending on the situation and the RF lenses that I'm using, and I can get away with it. This bad boy, you're pushing to 12,800 all day without problems with great RF glass. They are both fantastic. I'm gonna just give a check mark to Canon right here in the middle. Check mark, Canon for doing a fantastic job. So I know that's a long video. Don't forget you can download sample RAW files from both of these cameras, and you're looking at the video shot on an R5 right now, so you see exactly what it looks like. I thank you guys very much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and that's where I'll leave it. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com. See ya.